Hello, and welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. This podcast is designed to provide that momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. Thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. Today, I have with me Zoe Oseni. Zoe is the Associate Director of Student Ministry. Did I get your title right?
The Associate Director of Student Development.
Ooh, okay.
Pretty close.
I read that the other day because I always want to be official and introduce people right. By the way, my name's Eric, and I am the, I don't even know my title. I'm the Director of Ministry or Executive Director of Ministry with Momentum. See, this is why it's important to get people's titles right. But I read that and I was like, I feel like that's not what you told me it was before. So, Zoe,
okay.
I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm thrilled with our partnership as I've gotten to know you over the last several years because you have led the worship travel team for Momentum. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but mostly because what you have done in leading the worship travel team is very similar or parallel track to what you do with the student ministry. So I'd love to just kind of like, let's hit the ground running and dive into some of this because there's a lot of things to talk about. But just for our listeners, our goal in this conversation is really to help churches, student ministries, maybe especially, to just kind of think through how do you build a band? I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they're all about Build-A-Bear. So when I was like, what's the title for this? I was like, Build a Band.
Build a band.
Build a Band. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But like, it's hard. It's hard to do that. Like sometimes you don't have the right people. Sometimes you have people, but you don't. They're the wrong people. like in student ministry, like, you know, can your drummer keep the beat? Like, how do you teach them? Like, it's more than just like playing the song professionally. Well, I want to get into all that and talk about it.
Yeah.
But let's kind of back up and let's just explain who you are for our listeners. You've done Momentum cohorts. You've been a travel team leader. You recently got married.
Yep.
You graduated from Cedarville, right? University.
Yep.
And you studied worship and youth ministry, right?
Worship, youth ministry, Christian education.
That's awesome. So you're very qualified for all of this. And you recently, like me, we had talked about this before, we got a master's degree in Christian leadership.
Yep.
So good work on that.
Yeah.
But like, I say all that to give you credibility, right? Because sometimes I think when you work in student ministry, people are like, you just like play video games and like eat pizza and you only work like one night a week, right?
Wrong.
So like, exactly. Like, give us context. What does a typical week look like for you? What are your kind of main goals and objectives in your role in developing leaders within your youth ministry?
Yeah. Based on your description, I'm probably like the worst youth leader ever. I honestly have no idea how to play video games.
There you go. Well,
and I don't
fair.
really eat pizza right now. So
okay.
Sad. Anyway, but yeah, I've been working at Grace Church Bath in their student ministry world and the creative arts world when I first started for like 5.5 years now. This July will be 6 years. And basically, they brought me on because they wanted to focus on developing students in worship. I think Pastor Jeff says this a lot, Jeff Bogue, just like some of the hardest positions to hire for a church are like a senior pastor and a worship leader.
Yeah.
Right. And so we were like, okay, how do we develop student worship leaders younger, even like pre-college and all that stuff, and just give them the heart and the vision for leading worship and the opportunity to. And so that's why kind of my position was created. That's why I came here, was to build that.
Right.
And so I have tried, I don't know, I feel like I've tried everything under the sun. About when I first started, it didn't exist, right? So I had to, there's pieces of it that existed, but kind of what happens now on our week-to-week basis, I had to kind of piece together, had to build, had to put attention to. And so that's kind of how it got where it is. So just to give you kind of like a big scale like zoom out, this is what like student worship looks like, at least what I do kind of week to week. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
It's just, we have a middle school ministry, we have a high school ministry. And so I have students in grades 6 through 12 who are involved with the student band. Some of them are in practice bands, which we have every week, which basically is like, hey, come learn the music, learn how to be in a band before you're performing in front of somebody. It's a safe environment. I also have like weekly youth group with our high school students. And so we have a rehearsal and they lead worship. It's all student led. There's no adults on the stage. Most of the tech is student led. The lights, the sound, not the sound, just kidding, but the like pro presenter. And we have student led worship nights that the students put together, and I work with them on that. And even I have middle school bands who lead once a month at our large group programming for middle school. So there's a lot going on. A lot of rehearsals, a lot of leading, a lot of practice going on in our ministry.
I love that. When I was in youth ministry as a youth pastor, I had this dream, right, of like starting a student band. And at the time we had like 25 students in our ministry, and the thought of like what you just described to like the youth pastor that said like, I have 25 kids in my youth ministry. They're like, whoa, like you just blew their brains. Right. And yet like everything is scalable.
Oh, for sure.
And so like, that's kind of where we want to take this conversation. Like for you, our listeners, we want to partner with you. We want to help you do this. We want to help you figure it out because you can, because it actually isn't like rocket science.
Yeah.
And so to be able to do that, like, so Zoe, I love that you built it to that level and you have all these things going because you're seeing students come out of that. Now, is your goal like that every one of these students would go be a worship pastor at a church? Like kind of go there.
No.
A little bit. Like, what is a win then for you?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the goals.
Right.
That's, and that has happened. There are people who have kind of come through that and decided like, I want to go into full-time ministry. I want to do the worship leading things. So that's a big win. And that's definitely one of the goals, but the majority of students who are in the youth band aren't going to leave that and go become a worship pastor at a church somewhere. Maybe 1 in 100. I don't know. I don't know what the statistics are necessarily, but I think really the biggest win is giving students an opportunity to lead, giving students an opportunity to serve, and kind of developing a spiritual discipline in our students of serving the church, using your gifts and talents to serve the church, to serve the body of Christ. And even, I don't know the exact numbers here, but like for students who have had adults pouring into their life throughout their high school years, middle school years, and who have had an opportunity to serve and to lead, statistically, they're much more likely to stay a part of the church when they graduate and go off to college, become an adult, whatever they do. And so like that's a big win is I think the students who are super invested in the band, like they're using talent that they've learned, that God has allowed them to learn to serve the church. And it's developing in them a heart of worship, a heart of servanthood. And those are huge, like discipleship things that we as youth pastors want and to show up in the lives of our students.
Well, and I love that, like, the reality is, as you know, like being in youth ministry now for several years, like, and playing this role, like you do get to see where those students go and where they land and how they use those gifts down the road. And so, you know, for me, I was in that role for 17 years, all at the same church. And so to get to see, like, I think exactly what you're saying. There are now former students of mine that are worship pastors at churches, and that's fun to see. There are also students that went on and they're like, they are faithfully attending a church somewhere. They work and live in the community. They're bankers and engineers and public school teachers and all the things. And yet they still love Jesus. They are connected to their local church, and they play bass or they play the drums for their band, and they're servants. Yeah, we love seeing that. And so you're helping create that track to run on for them. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So Zoe, kind of give our listeners I'm sure anybody listening to this right now is like, okay, how do you do that? Give us kind of as you map that out and you think through what all goes into developing those student worship leaders. How do you do that? What's the process look like? Kind of walk us through on a high level. I'm sure we could do hours of this kind of conversation, but what does that process look like start to finish? How do you onboard somebody? What are the steps that you want them to take? What does that look like in your context? And we can then talk kind of how to scale that.
Yeah, I think one of the first questions you have to ask yourself as a youth pastor, as someone leading a student ministry, whatever your title is the why. Why do I want to have a band? Why do I want to have a student band? Because I think that question steers how you approach things. If it's we just want our youth group to be bigger and maybe having a band is going to make it look better, that's probably not a great reason.
Yeah.
Students can go on YouTube and watch the Rihanna Super Bowl concert and be wowed. They can go to a Harry Styles concert and be like, this is amazing. Yeah. You're not going to get that with your new student band that's just starting. Right. So I think that reasoning behind why do we want to start a student band has to kind of center around, we want to create serving opportunities, or we have students who have this gifting and we just need to create a way for them to use that, a way for them to serve. We'd look at any other student with leadership or other talent gifting and try to make a lane for them to lead in.
Yeah.
And so once you have that why, I think then it's there's a few things. This is the $1 million question, right?
For sure.
So there's a few things that come to my mind. The first is it needs intentional leadership. So if you're let's start a student band and you think about it for 5 minutes of your week, you will never have a student band.
Right. It is a lot of work.
Right. I have plants at home that people give me, and most of the time they look dead because I don't water them as much as they need to be watered. I don't give them the attention they need. It's the same thing with any ministry you're looking to start. It needs attention. Yeah. And so I think if you want to start a student band serving opportunity, it needs attention. And so it's your leadership team has to agree, this is something we want to do and we want to run after to see what God does. And you put resources, you put time, you put attention to it. And you probably need to assign someone to have their brain on it.
For sure.
Right? It might not be the only thing they're doing, but at least someone who's I'm thinking about this as part of my regular week to kind of push things forward.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Then I think the second thing would be find the students, find the student leaders. If you have even 2-3 students who have some sort of musical skill, maybe they're in choir at school, maybe they're part of the jazz band, who knows, they have some sort of musical gifting and they're a part of your group. It's hey, bring those students in, give them vision for what you're wanting to do.
Yep.
And then also come alongside them, partner with them, run along with them to give them leadership. But those students need vision from you as the leader. And so they need to know what they're running after. They need to know what they can do and what they cannot do. Yep. They need to know what kind of resources they have. So yeah, I think intentional leadership, your student leaders, find student leaders to build something with. And then the third piece of this is honestly just jump right into an audition. Even if you're you're going to be a part of it, do the audition, because what that does is it creates a sense of realness. This is a real thing. Right. This has credibility. We're really looking for specific things. We're looking to really get a beat on what skill level you have, but also the audition process gives you a one-on few, whatever opportunity to say, hey, why do you want to be a part of the band? Yeah. It's a discipleship opportunity. Hey, tell me about your relationship with Jesus and how that's influenced this choice you're making. Yep. And then audition naturally needs a follow-up, right? Yep. So then you get to follow up and be okay, you guys, we auditioned you. Sounds great. This is when we're meeting. And the audition also allows you to set expectations for what it means to be a part of the band, whether that's time commitment, whether that's what leadership looks like, whether like whatever it is, you get to do that. And even if you like aren't the person that knows musical skill or not, bring someone in who does.
Yeah.
Or like most people can tell, like, wow, they really cannot sing. You know?
Yes.
and I think especially the younger the students, and we can talk more about this maybe later, but like the younger the students, I say yes to most everyone at the beginning because I want to give people an opportunity to like explore it. Of course they're not going to be good at their skill. Of course they're not going to be good at leading when they're 13 years old.
Right. Right.
And so
it's not American Idol.
No. So you have to give them an opportunity to try something and then let them step into that leadership. Let them step into giving it a shot.
And I like that you're saying like having that intentional leader, because that's the person that really is going to pour water on that. They're the ones that are going to give them resources to help them learn and be successful. So Zoe, every like listener, I keep trying to think about our listeners in this, because like I know we have a lot of pastors and even parents that listen to this. Guys, this is all scalable. Everything that you're saying could be applied to a church of under 200 people that wants to like have a band, because you're like one guy that you pay 10 hours a week is going on vacation for 2 months, and you're like, hey, we need, or whatever the scenario. All of this is scalable. So finding the intentional leader that can give the resources, that can speak into the vision, that's super good. But Zoe, what do you do when you have like the student in your youth group, or maybe it's the adult in your context, where you like do that interview process, you do the audition, you're like, hey, help me like understand. I love what you said. Like, tell me about your relationship with Jesus and how is that impacting you? Why do you want to do this? But you're like, this is like the guitar guy in my student ministry, and he takes his acoustic guitar on every retreat and he just sits and plays to the girls. And he like every church or student ministry has some variation of guitar guy, I think. Like, and you're like, I'm pretty sure you just want to do this to be like on the stage and like create a following, and maybe you're like have question about their heart might not be in it. What do you do with that? Like, what questions do you ask? How do you draw that a little bit deeper out of that?
Yeah. Just to be clear, I think like every middle school and high school boy is like that. Like,
fair.
Like,
okay, see, now you're a good youth leader because like, you understand that concept.
Most of the time, the primary reason you join the band is because you want to look awesome in front of your friends or in front of the ladies or whatever.
And if we're honest, adults are guilty of that too.
For sure.
Yes.
For sure.
Let's just put the cards on the table.
Right? That doesn't mean they're disqualified from doing this. I think that like, if you have that like, that one person, that one guy who's willing to do it and is faithful and is showing up and is leading, hey, lean into that willingness to lead. But give that person vision for what it could be. Give that person vision for like, hey, like you're going to graduate from here. What are you leaving behind? Right? Like, hey, why don't we take a pause for a few weeks from even having music at all so that you can work on building a team, meet with people, talk with people, give people vision, right? Like, and also like once a team is built, like you're teaching that leader how to lead other people. So now they're not just playing music, they're leading people. They're leading their team, and that's probably a more valuable skill set than anything. And so it's actually a discipleship opportunity when you have someone like that who's like, I just want to do this to look awesome, and I'll show up every week, and I'm going to play whatever.
And let's be honest, they're not going to say that in the audition process.
They're going to be like, I love Jesus, and he gave me these skills, and I just want to serve him. Cool. That sounds great. Right? And I think sometimes that is in there.
Yes, for sure.
Right? That's the right answer, so to speak. But like, and as their pastor, as their student leader, if they're committing to sign up to lead, they're committing to your discipleship.
Yes.
So I think no matter what ministry lanes you have within your ministry, always use them as tools for discipleship. That is the biggest win of all of this.
Yeah.
With worship, with music, sometimes people get that confused because they're like, it has to be about how good it sounds. It has to be about us having the best band. If it's cringy,
right,
it's whatever. But in the student world,
yep,
I think student bands are about discipleship first,
yeah,
music last.
yep.
Yeah.
I love that you said that. And that's part of Zoe, because I know your heart in that. And that's like, our hearts have been aligned in that for a long time, is we've developed the worship ministry travel team.
Yeah.
Like those high school students that are literally meeting each other for the very first time. And they only have, really, it's 2 weeks together.
I was thinking about that the other day.
They literally have 2 weeks together, and we're like, hey, you're going to form a band. And, you know, we do an audition process.
Yep.
There's an application process. We want to help. Our goal really is to come alongside the local church and help raise up and develop those leaders, and even start this whole process in your own church.
Yeah.
But the reality, the funny thing is that a lot of people don't know, is with that team, we actually don't let the students pick up their instruments or play together for the first, 2-3 days?
2 to 3 days, yeah.
And so the first time we did that, the students are like, day 3, they're like antsy. They're like,
so antsy.
we're the worship travel team. Like, why aren't we playing any music? Like,
Yeah.
we're supposed to like play in front of people, like our peers. I think we had them like lead a middle school event, like 2 days later, and they're like, we haven't even played together yet. But we want to teach them those very things.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this is actually secondary. Like, if you hit all the key notes and you sing all the words right, that's like a cherry on the top. Like, that's actually not the like win. The win is your heart.
Yeah.
Like, I threatened my youth band with this for years, where I'm like, there were times where like their hearts were not right, and they would tell me that. They knew it. The quick story of that, like the one time, a couple of my drummer and another guy were smoking weed and doing Bible study, and I'm like, you're the like leaders of the, this isn't okay.
Yeah.
And so like I pulled them for weeks, and we did YouTube worship videos.
Yeah.
Like, we had a really good band, and I'm like, we're not doing that. Like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to help them with those things is a big deal.
For sure. And with the worship world comes this idea of like fame, of like, I'm on a stage, I'm under lights, I'm in front of people.
Yep.
It's really hard. Most worship leaders I know who it's their full-time job struggle with that tension, struggle with the tension between performance and worship, struggle with the tension between like, I'm leading people and they are loving it, or they're super critical of it, right? It's really easy to let your identity become that. And something I challenge my students with is, hey, are you worshiping the stage? Are you worshiping the music and how good you sound? Or are you worshiping the God these songs are talking about?
Yep.
Right? And so like, as the leader whose mind is thinking about the student band, I have to constantly speak vision, constantly speak that into them, just to kind of bring us back to remember, like, we're worshiping God.
Yep.
We're not worshiping this performance.
Yep.
We're not even worshiping these songs. We're not worshiping the aesthetic.
Yes.
Right?
The feel.
The vibes.
Yeah.
No.
Yep.
These songs are talking about God.
Yeah.
And like, as humans, we are created, designed to worship Him and Him alone. And anytime we prioritize that wrong, we're idol worshiping, essentially, right? Either worshiping ourselves or worshiping a performance or something else. And so that's something I have to talk about a lot with our students.
Really good. I think it was Louis Giglio was the first one that I heard say this, but like he talks about like, we want to be door holders into the throne room of heaven. And so he did that for like the band, but it also is for like the actual like first impressions team, the people who are literally holding the door, even like everyone on your church staff. If that's your mindset, like, we're just ushering people into the presence of God today. That's our role. And so it's actually not about us at all.
That's right.
It's about Him, and we want you to have an encounter with Him and to hear His voice and to have a meaningful moment with the Lord. And so our job as worship leaders, as the pastor, as the usher or greeter or the barista in the church cafe, like, Your job is to hold the door open to the throne room of heaven,
Yeah.
where the living God sits, and you get to have an experience with him.
Yeah. I also just want to say a little bit connected to that is that, like, say one good way to start a band is to have an adult who's like, I'm going to lead worship. I'm going to build a team of students around me, and then I'm going to pass it off.
There you go.
If you're that person, guy or girl, that takes a lot of humility. Once you get to the point where now it's the student's turn to do it, to pass it off takes a lot of humility. To be the coach instead of the player takes a lot of humility. And I think as the leader of a ministry, you have to be willing to sacrifice quality for the sake of student leadership sometimes. So, like, you might not always have the best sound coming from your student band, but you're giving it an opportunity to lead. So you kind of have to, like, weigh those things when you're deciding how to navigate that.
I mean, if we're honest, because I know you've done this, there may be times where you have to model and speak to, cast vision for your youth ministry, or even for your church, where you're like, you're just putting the cards on the table, or speaking to the elephant in the room and saying, like, hey guys, we know that, like, this probably isn't going to feel like you're at a Hillsong concert. Like, we know this probably isn't going to feel like you're at Momentum Youth Conference, right? But, like, that's okay. It's your hearts are what matters in this moment. And our praise team, we're learning, we're growing. And, you know, that's an opportunity for you as the leader to, like, publicly affirm their growth and speak life into them, but also to say to your congregation, to your youth ministry, like, hey, we're giving them an opportunity. We're excited about this.
Yeah.
Like, they're working hard to learn these songs to help us have a meaningful moment with the Lord.
That also kind of sets the stage for what kind of and how someone gives feedback to those people. Of, like, it's okay to give honest feedback to somebody, but do that with encouragement. Do that with love. And if you're somebody who's leading a student ministry and you have zero idea how music or tech works, ask a lot of questions, right? Be the student's like partner in that.
Right.
Be someone who's fighting for them, not someone who's critical of them. And I'd say this: never sever your relationship with a student because they played a song wrong.
Yep.
Right? Like, that's not the win. That's telling them that their performance and what they can give your ministry is more important or more invaluable than them as a person.
Right.
Right. And so, like, be encouraging, give feedback, but do it in love.
The reality is they probably already know that they messed up that part of the song.
They know.
And they don't need you to tell them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, Zoe, like, let's kind of turn the corner here on this. Like, for a church or a student ministry that they're trying to think through, like, we'd love to have that. We don't know if we have those people. I don't know if I have the leader. I don't know if I have the students. I don't know if I have the people to play the instruments. Where would you encourage them to start? What do they do to look through that? Obviously, prayer is a very good starting point. But, like, how would you coach somebody in that? If somebody came to you and said, help me.
Yeah. I think that, like, any person leading a group of students has to look at their students and know them, first of all, know what they're good at, know if they're passionate about something specific. If your whole youth group is, like, super into sports, do sports.
Right.
If your whole youth group is, like, super into gaming, do that. I don't know. But, like, if you have a group of students who are musical and who are passionate about that, run with that.
Yep.
That's where you start. I don't want people to feel pressure to have a student band if that's not something that's where there's gifting or where there's passion, because worship is not about music.
There you
right?
go.
You should lead your students in worship, but it doesn't have to be music.
Right.
Worship is a lot of things. Worship is tithing, it's servanthood, it's a spiritual discipline, it's reading your Bible, it's the way that you live your life in response to who God is.
Yep.
And so I'd say, like, look at your youth group and be like, how can I lead these students in worship? And that doesn't have to mean music.
Yep. So good.
Yeah.
So good. So, Zoe, in essence, what you're speaking to is how do we create those relational environments where God can speak and he can move and work in those places. And your job is you get to try and figure out how do we reproduce that. And so that's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
And if you have a student who's passionate about it, give them the keys to the kingdom. Be like, hey, let's figure this out together.
Yeah.
Hey, let me give you resources. Hey, let me be a sounding board.
Yeah.
It's going to be more successful if they do it anyways, because they'll get their friends on board versus like the old guy trying to be like, let's start a band. They're going to be like, okay.
Yeah.
But if it's the student who's like, hey guys, I need your help. I need a bass player. Can you do this?
Yep. It's that principle, I think, of like looking at where God's working and joining him there.
It's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like if you have, I mean, I literally know of a church in Virginia, and they had, for their adult services, they had like pastoral change, and like the new guy that came in is a buddy of mine, and he was telling me, he's like, we have this high school girl and she plays the ukulele and that's about all we got. And they, no joke, like had a high school girl lead worship for their Sunday services playing the ukulele for about 8 weeks. And she then learned how to play the guitar.
There you go.
And she then like started like building a team around her because he gave her the keys of the kingdom. He's like, you're gifted in this. Like, and he saw potential in her, even as a high school student. And I'm like, buddy, I high five that all day long. Yeah. And so like they built a band off of a high school girl playing ukulele.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I like look at students and be like, hey man, I know that you're a drummer, but like I really need some more bass players. Can you step into that? And they're like, yeah. Yeah. And then they do. Right. So like just put a need out there and let students like rise to it.
It's funny like how quick students are able to learn so quickly with that stuff. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's amazing.
YouTube is a miracle.
Yeah. Yeah. And cause they can learn that stuff super fast too. And like really be able to like have all that figured out. So, all right. So Zoe, we're running out of time here.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of think through like, we would almost be remiss to have this conversation, which is super good, but to not talk about what Momentum Travel Teams actually has to offer, where you kind of have joined our Momentum staff the last couple of summers. You're doing that again this year. Now, congrats, you just got married. And so I guess, you know, your husband doesn't want you to leave for a couple of weeks, which I totally understand. But you're still involved in that and helping do the audition process and the application process with the travel team students. Talk about like, what has your involvement been as a leader? You're now like administratively leading that team. You've seen the success of that. Like these students get to like literally in 2 weeks, they get trained and equipped in all these ways. And it's the equivalent of like 6 months to a year's worth of like a deep dive into that stuff. And then our goal is to send them back to your local church to continue that path forward and serve and lead in these ways in your local church. So it's a way that we partner together, but speak to that from your experience. Kind of, you have this unique perspective where you've sent some of your own student ministry students to a travel team. Talk into that, and then as a leader.
Yeah. So, the past couple of years, I've been able to lead the worship travel team, and I think it is an intense experience. It's fast paced. It's focused on discipleship, but also worship leading. I mean, to take a group of students who don't know each other, throw them together, have them become a band, and go from leading a middle school ministry to, I mean, last year they got to lead at conference. They got to lead at...
They're going to get to do that again this year.
Access at youth conference. And so, I mean, that's huge. That's a massive experience for
thousands of people.
For students. And so, and with that comes, the lack of sleep, the teenage emotions, all of it. Yeah. But I think we walk away as a family because it is an intense experience. We learn, we grow together, we work through all those challenges together. And watching our other leaders kind of like pour into students, work with them, just like through discipleship, through spiritual conversations, but also work with them musically. Yes. It's a huge win. And there's story after story of students who have done it the past couple of years, who are leading at their churches, who are going into full-time ministry, who do have a heart for worship and are serving the local church. And I think the majority of the students who have done it the past couple of years would be in that boat. Yep. And that's a huge win to me and a huge success.
I think it's so fun because we've tracked that some, and like as you look at those students and what they're doing, the return on investment for a local church, it's huge because those students are going home and they're like, hey, pastor, like, can I actually, like, I learned, and not just like the leading worship side, but like the technical side. The like, one of our former students, like, he went home and he like got a line item budget from his church and retooled their entire like sound system and lights and
what a boss.
Tech. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And so the connections that they make with the churches that they go to, those are also like new ministry partners that Ascending Church could have.
That's a huge part of that, is the networking, the connecting with these ministry professionals, tech leaders, worship pastors, worship leaders that they get to connect with, network with, even for future jobs and who knows, but also currently right now. And one of our students last year is like starting a student band at her church, and her leaders are like, how can we help you with that? And she's like, okay, here we go. Yeah. Right. So
let me call Zoe.
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. I know.
Yeah.
But that's part of the resource that we want to have. That's where I like get so excited about what Momentum is doing and through these travel teams. And so if you're listening to this, if you're a parent and you're like, my son or daughter needs to do that, we agree they do. If you are a youth pastor or a pastor and you're like, how can we be a part of this? Seriously, call us, like reach out, email us, info@buildmomentum.org is the easiest way to get through to me. But just reach out. Like Tim Lansing, our travel team director, we're literally like setting up Zoom calls, two or three of them a week to meet with pastors and parents. And like, youth pastor, you don't have to be the middleman. Like, we'll get on a Zoom call or a phone call with your students and their parents, and they can ask us all the questions that they want about what's involved in this. And it's a really amazing opportunity and experience. So Zoe, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your wealth of wisdom, and you're doing a great job developing leaders to have maximum impact for God's kingdom. So thanks,
Eric. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you to our listeners. Please, as always, rate and review this, the episode, the podcast. That would be super helpful for us and for others to know about this episode as well. Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in.
Well, guys, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'd be really honored if you went ahead and subscribed to the podcast, and that way you can just kind of stay up to date with the episodes that we're posting in the future. To learn more about Momentum Ministry Partners and our many other resources, please be sure to follow us on social media at Momentum Ministry Partners, or check out our website, www.buildmomentum.org.